We are standing at the edge of a bottleneck. The models predict that the next 30 years will bring heat, famine, and collapse. But extinction is not inevitable. This is a timeline of what happens when the climate crisis really hits. The year 2035. The first domino didn't fall in the stock markets or the Capitol buildings. It fell in the silence of the deep. By 2035, the oceans reached a thermal tipping point that biology simply could not endure. We witnessed the great extinction events. It started with the coral, not just a bleaching event here or there, but a planetary collapse. The Great Barrier Reef, the Mesoamerican Reef, the structures that supported 25% of all marine life turned stark white and died. With them went the fisheries. Practically overnight, a primary protein source for over 1 billion people evaporated. Biodiversity loss accelerated from a decline to a free fall. Governments panic. The era of global mitigation, the idea that we could save everything, ended. In its place came the era of climate triage. Nations stopped sending aid abroad and turned inward, pouring their remaining budgets into coastal defenses and securing potable water for their own populations. The term climate refugee shifted from a humanitarian concern to the single greatest political crisis in human history. We were finally paying the price for abusing the earth, but in 2035, we still didn't appreciate just how high the bill would be. 2037. 2 years later, the money ran out. We had built our global economy on the assumption of stability, but the weather had become an agent of chaos. The compounding costs of relentless disasters, hurricanes, fires, floods, collided with a massive destabilizing wave of AI-driven automation that gutted the labor market. The result was the great economic collapse of 2037. It dwarfed the Great Depression. And here is the cruel irony that doomed this decade. The crash destroyed the green transition. The global supply chains required for renewable energy are fragile. They rely on rare earth magnets from one continent, turbine blades from another, and advanced battery materials from a third. When the economy shattered, those chains broke. We couldn't build new wind farms. We couldn't repair the solar grids. Desperate to keep the lights on and society from dissolving into anarchy, nations reverted to what they had in reserve. We fired up the old coal plants. We uncapped the oil wells. For basic survival, we returned to high-emission legacy infrastructure, accelerating the very climate stress that was destroying us. A deep, terrifying unease settled over the world. We realized there was no quick 5-year fix. We were trapped. Year 2040. Then came the heat. Not the heat of a summer day, but a new biological ceiling. By 2040, science fiction became a horrifying reality with the emergence of the first inhospitable zone. Sustained wet bulb temperatures, the lethal combination of heat and humidity where the human body can no longer cool itself by sweating. It rendered the Persian Gulf and vast swaths of South Asia unworkable for most of the year. You couldn't go outside for more than an hour without risking death. This triggered the Great Retreat. It was the largest movement of human beings in history. Tens of millions of people, panic-stricken and desperate, surged from the coastal and hyper-humid zones toward the cooler latitudes. China became the primary destination, absorbing the largest migration waves in the world from South Asia. But this wasn't a temporary crisis. It was a sustained, destabilizing flow that lasted over a decade, peaking between 2040 and 2050. The infrastructure of host nations, food, water, and hospitals buckled under the impossible strain. 2043. The strain proved too much for the world's second superpower. China, already suffering from the political fallout of the failed invasion of Taiwan in 2027, fractured. The internal strife had been building for years as the central government lost the faith of its people. But the catastrophe of 2043 was the breaking point. The vast scale of internal migration, millions fleeing the arid, desertifying north, and millions more fleeing the sinking southern coast, collided with the external refugee crisis. When crop failures struck the interior, the mandate of heaven was lost. Major, prolonged internal conflict erupted, effectively taking China off the board as a stabilizing global force and fracturing the geopolitical order. 2045. By the mid-40s, the maps were changing. Sea level rise accelerated beyond the worst-case models. The 100-year flood was now an annual event in New York, Miami, and Shanghai. We realized we couldn't save the cities. Coastal infrastructure was effectively abandoned. The wealthy moved inland, the poor were left in the rising damp. But while the waters rose on Earth, humanity found a lifeline in the stars. This was the year of the Asteroid pivot. Private ventures, once seen as the playgrounds of billionaires, gained massive political sway because they offered the one thing Earth had run out of: resources. On the Moon, engineers achieved the holy grail of spaceflight, the fuel break-even point. They perfected the extraction of water ice from near-Earth asteroids. Water in space means hydrogen fuel, oxygen, and radiation shielding. Suddenly, there was a viable economic path to mine and manufacture off-world, offering a glimmer of hope that we could stop tearing up the Earth to save it. 2048. But nature wasn't done with us. As land was lost to heat and sea, humans, livestock, and wild animals were forced into tighter and tighter pockets of habitable land. This biological cramping created a petri dish for disease. In 2048, a new zoonotic pandemic erupted. It was a nightmare scenario. Unlike COVID-19, this virus had a mortality rate of 5%, and it did not discriminate by age. It killed the young as efficiently as the old. The shock to the global system was profound, exacerbating social instability and terror. We knew in our hearts that this was our fault, a direct consequence of destroying the buffer zones between civilization and the wild. 2049. The pandemic paralyzed the world, but the climate data was screaming a warning we could no longer ignore: methane. We needed to cut emissions immediately, or we would cross a threshold of no return. In 2049, the international community enforced the Cull decree. It was one of the most drastic, controversial measures in human history. To slash methane output, over 90% of the global cattle population was culled. It was a brutal logistical operation that changed human diet forever, accelerating a forced societal shift towards synthetic proteins. The era of cheap beef was over. The era of survival had begun. 2050. The following year, the food systems finally broke. Prolonged droughts and unrelenting heat domes parked themselves over the world's breadbaskets. The U.S. Corn Belt and the fertile plains of South Asia suffered chronic, multi-year failures. Aquifers that had been drained for a century finally ran dry. We entered the era of the militarization of food. Calories became the primary currency of global conflict. The world's survival now depended critically on the warming tundra of Russia and Ukraine, and on highly militarized, energy-intensive indoor vertical farms that could only feed a fraction of the population. 2053. Then came the darkness. 2053, the year of the global famine. The combination of crop collapse, shattered supply chains, and hoarding by militarized states led to the unimaginable. Food shortages claimed the lives of nearly 1.5 billion people. It was a culling of humanity. The global population dropped to a manageable size, but the moral cost was a stain on our species that would never wash away. Regimes collapsed, revolutions swept through the starving nations. It was the nadir of human civilization, the moment we nearly went extinct. 2055. From the ashes of the famine, science produced a miracle. Too late for the dead, but just in time to save the species from total annihilation. We perfected lab-grown nutrition, the new synthetic sustenance. We cracked the code on making stable, scalable, and affordable lab-grown meat and complete plant-based nutritional pastes. The famine crisis was technically solved. This breakthrough meant we could stop farming the exhausted soil, stop relying on the increasingly chaotic weather. Vast tracts of land previously used for monoculture and animal agriculture could be abandoned, setting the stage for ecological repair. Our food security was finally secured. But our water security was gone. 2056. The collapse era ended in fire. 2056 marked the beginning of the Great Water Wars. It was a final, massive conflict fought not for ideology or oil, but for the remaining potable water sources in North Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. The fighting was savage. The crisis peaked on the India-Pakistan border. Pushed to the brink of national dehydration, a very limited nuclear exchange occurred. It was surgical, targeting key water infrastructure, dams, and river flow controls rather than population centers. But the psychological impact was absolute. We didn't trigger a nuclear winter, but the sight of mushroom clouds rising over drying rivers broke something in the global psyche. The terror solidified a new absolute global resolve. The fighting had to stop. The resource independence had to be achieved. We could not live like this anymore. 2060. Out of the trauma of the water wars, a new human civilization emerged. We looked up. 2060 marked the opening of the Lunar Logistics Hub. Moon colonization transitioned from scientific outposts to a major global enterprise. Large-scale bases were established to process resources, specifically helium-3. This was the game changer. Helium-3 provided the ideal fuel for the next generation of fusion power. Combined with massive space-based solar power arrays beaming energy back to Earth, we began the Great Decommissioning. We finally started turning off the legacy fossil fuel grids that had been choking us for 2 centuries. 2065. By the mid-60s, humanity was stabilizing. The population was shrinking, but we were learning to live on a scarred planet. Global policy was rebuilt around a single tenet: planetary stewardship. The technologies developed for space travel came home. The advantages of building in zero gravity and the infinite resources of asteroid mining allowed us to deploy highly effective specialist desalination and water recycling plants. We began to fix the global water crisis. Major coastal cities like New York, now permanently altered, sat behind monumental flood barriers. The skies in these cities were visibly clearer than they had been in 100 years. But let's be clear, we were still paying the price. The climate system is a slow beast, and the damage we had done would take decades to unwind. 2069. As we stabilized our own lives, we turned to the lives we were losing. In 2069, global collaboration launched the DNA catalog, known colloquially as Noah's Archive. It was a depressing, sorrowful undertaking. Scientists raced to catalog the complete DNA of thousands of threatened species before they vanished. We created extinction insurance, banking genetic code in hopes that future synthetic biology could reintroduce them. It was an admission of guilt, a promise to the future that we would try to put back what we had broken. 2070. Then came the economic tipping point. By 2070, the zero-G advantage was undeniable. It turned out that manufacturing in space wasn't just cleaner, it was better. In the vacuum and microgravity of orbit, we could create perfect crystal lattices, flawless fiber optics, and superalloys impossible to forge on Earth. Asteroid-derived materials flooded the market. This triggered the great industrial exit. Heavy industry, smelting, chemical plants, and massive data centers were moved off-world. Terrestrial pollution dropped drastically as the smokestacks of Earth went cold, replaced by the silent industry of the stars. 2075. 5 years later, we made it law. The supply of space-source metals was so abundant and stable that the international community passed the end of terrestrial mining decree. All high-impact mines on Earth were permanently closed. The attitude toward polluting the Earth for profit had shifted from negligence to criminal hostility. Everyone alive had lost someone to the climate crisis. Tolerating pollution was no longer socially or legally acceptable. This year also marked the start of the true cleanup. We used the zero-G manufacturing capacity to mass-produce hyper-efficient direct air capture devices. These machines, built in orbit and dropped to the surface, began the gargantuan task of scrubbing carbon and methane from the atmosphere. 2078. We adapted the planet, but we also had to adapt ourselves. In 2078, advancements in gene editing led to the thermal adaptation gene drive. This was a voluntary, controlled alteration of the human genome. It allowed biological pioneers to live safely in the heat-stricken, harsh zones of the equator that had been abandoned 40 years prior. These people led hard lives, but they were the vanguard of recolonization, reclaiming the parts of the world we thought we had lost forever. 2085. The end of the detox era was marked by the light of a new sun. The first true commercial, safe fusion power plants came online on Earth, fueled by moon-sourced helium-3. Fossil fuels were rendered obsolete, not by regulation, but by obsolescence. The combination of zero-emission fusion energy and the massive power-hungry carbon capture grid led to a historic milestone. For the first time in over a century, scientists confirmed a verifiable, sustained downward trend in atmospheric pollution. The CO2 parts per million count began to fall. Hope, genuine and scientific, returned to the human race. 2105. As we entered the 22nd century, we deployed our ultimate safety net. Using autonomous mining fleets and zero-G fabrication, humanity constructed and deployed the Albedo shield, the sun umbrella. Based on concepts from the 21st century, these ultra-light reflective films were parked in key orbital regions to reduce solar radiation hitting the poles. It was geoengineering on a massive scale. The shield arrested the worst of the ice melt, buying us the decades we needed for the atmospheric scrubbers to catch up. The climate emergency was officially downgraded. 2125. By 2125, the Earth began to breathe again. We hit the global rewilding peak. Robotics and synthetic biology, developed in the clean labs of orbit, were used to rapidly restore extinct plant species and repair the soil and ocean microbiomes. And this year, the data gave us the signal we had been waiting for. Ocean acidity began to reverse. The pH level stabilized, allowing the oceans to support life again. This was the era of the gardener. We opened Noah's Archive. We began to use the DNA samples to resurrect lost species, restoring them to their ecological niches. It wasn't just science, it was penance. The human instinct had shifted from conqueror to custodian. We were fixing our home. 100 years after the starvation of the mid-21st century, we won the war. In 2150, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 hit 350 ppm, the level considered safe for long-term climate stability. We had done it. We had wrestled the climate back under control. The new Earth was different. The coastlines were different, the weather patterns were new, but it was stable. We stopped fighting the rising seas and began to adapt to them, reclaiming coastal areas with floating architecture and salt-tolerant infrastructure. 2025. We arrive at the end of our timeline. The year is 2225. Earth's population has stabilized at a healthy, sustainable 4 billion, with a further 500 million living off-world. Poverty is largely a relic of the past, and human focus is entirely on maintaining the climate and managing the sprawling, vibrant interplanetary economy. We are no longer just an Earth-bound species. We are permanently interplanetary. Earth has become the core garden world, a protected sanctuary, a living monument to what we almost destroyed. It is managed and supplied by industrial satellites and off-world colonies. We have complete control of our climate. We have reintroduced the Amur leopard to the forests and the coral to the reefs. And with the hard-won knowledge of the last 2 centuries, we are turning our eyes outward. We are applying the techniques of planetary transformation to Mars, to Venus, to the moons of Jupiter. We are creating new garden worlds in the dark, carrying the lesson of the long war with us to the stars. That a planet is not a resource to be consumed, but a life support system to be sustained.